Thank you all for joining me for our second nutritional webinar, The Secret Cure to Weight Loss and Detox. You know, with summer right around the corner, many of us are doing a specialized spring cleanse or a detox regimen. But quite honestly, I bet most of you are overlooking a very important but unrecognized component to a truly effective program. So let me explain. As many of us also know, the liver is a major organ. It's a fat-burning organ that is often overlooked and not considered in terms of its fat-burning tasks. It's estimated that your lovely liver performs nearly 500 different jobs, many of them being orchestrated at the same time. To me, it's the body's most important organ because it functions as a living filter to cleanse the system of toxins, metabolize proteins, control hormonal balance, and produce immune-boosting factors. And many of these functions are absolutely essential to overall health. And I can think of one, for example, and that's that the liver's synthesis of fibrinogen and other blood clotting functions have a direct bearing on your weight loss efforts. Well, there's a seldom mentioned secret, hidden cure, if you will, to weight loss that's directly connected to the liver that I believe you will be astounded and quite amazed, as I was, to finally uncover. It's something that modern medicine seems to have completely forgotten, even our most up-to-date and enlightened integrative functional medicine doctors. And it's something that I've known about because the health pioneers of the earliest 20th century held it in most high esteem. And that element was bile. That's right, you heard it right, bile. Bile is brilliant. Bile is beautiful because the amount of bile that your body manufactures is directly connected to how you can digest and break down and emulsify fats, and to the amount of toxins you can safely eliminate from your body. It appears now, based on some of the latest research, that inadequate bile or poor flowing bile is connected to a number of increasingly common symptoms. I can think of a few offhand. One of them is your inability to truly lose weight. Another is dry skin, itchy skin, constipation, depression, chronic fatigue, and even, amazingly enough, hypothyroidism. Many individuals are finding that when they get their gallbladder out and their bile production is uneven or irregular, they start to develop thyroid problems. So maybe that's one of the reasons that there's such a hidden epidemic in terms of thyroid issues. Well, the good news, my friends, is that many of these symptoms and conditions can be easily remedied, whether or not you still have your gallbladder. What you have to understand is that each and every day, your liver is going to produce about a quarter of this rather yellowish green liquid, whose job it is to emulsify and absorb fats in the small intestine. Now, bile itself contains water, bile acids and pigments, cholesterol, maybe some lipids, lecithin, potassium, sodium, and chloride. This bitter liquid is stored near the liver in a storage tank, which is known as your gallbladder. And from your gallbladder, the bile is transported to the intestines as it's needed during digestion. So bile is truly the real key to the liver's ability to digest and assimilate fats, and is one of the most important elements in terms of detox, because besides the filtering of blood, as well as the two-phase enzyme system that the liver employs, bile is a major method of removing toxins. Now, since it is such an important element in terms of its ability to digest and assimilate fats, we have to understand how it can be hampered from doing its job. And that will occur because you've got a lack of the precursors, a lack of the precursing bile nutrients, or the bile becomes very congested or thickened, or it starts to clog the bile ducts. And all of this can hamper the bile flow and then result in less bile production, thus a bile deficiency. And I've written about this in several books. Eat Fat, Lose Weight was the latest one. It's my little Kindle, which is still available online on Amazon. I've also done several interviews for many magazines, including First for Women. And what is so astounding is this: if there is not enough bile produced, then your fat cannot be truly emulsified and broken down, and you're going to be losing out on all the benefits of those fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A, the infection-fighting vitamin. Vitamin E, your circulatory vitamin. Vitamin K, the vitamin that puts calcium in its place. Vitamin D, the immune booster, and even essential fatty acids that you know are important on a day-to-day basis for every tissue and cell and organ of the body. You also need to recognize the important role of fat in terms of your entire well-being. And so if you find that you've got this little roll of fat at your waistline, then you may in fact have a fatty liver where the liver can no longer be emulsifying fat. And sometimes that is due to a number of issues, most likely too much alcohol, but beyond that, too much high fructose corn syrup or even foods that contain too much fructose. So when you have a fatty liver, which is becoming an increasingly common issue among so many Americans, and most of them don't even know it, well, your liver has stopped processing fat and then it begins to store it. So it's only when you bring your liver back to full function will you start to lose that fat. And you know, the good news is that the liver can be regenerated. It's one of the organs of our body that can be regenerated if you've got the right precursors and the right material. So bile, in essence, is a type of soap for fats. I mean, it's a true emulsifier. It has the ability to break down fats into very small particles so that your intestines can then absorb them. And again, produced by the liver to the tune of about 1 quart per day. Bile is so very, very important, but we don't seem to regard it as important in this day and time because nobody is talking about it. So the news flash is this: bile is not only the real key to the body's ability to digest and assimilate fats, but it is a primary vehicle that your liver employs for removing toxins from your body so they can be flushed out through the colon. Since bile is one of the liver's premier detox mechanisms, besides the filtering of blood and the two-phase enzyme system, the cytochrome P450, the consequences of not having enough bile really go far beyond the ability to lose weight. You see, if your liver can't clear fats, then it most likely can't break down hormones, so too much estrogen dominance starts to rule your life, or you've got too many metabolic waste products, or you end up with all kinds of hormonal dysfunctions like hot flashes, night sweats, cysts, sometimes migraines, etc., etc. So to put it another way, I believe that bile is one of the most underrated and truly ignored methods that our body utilizes to move out toxins. And again, the quantity of bile your body makes is directly proportional to the quantity of toxins you can eliminate. Now, I'm saying these things over and over again because these are so important. I had never heard of them in my over 3 decades of dealing with nutrition, the way that people need to learn about this. And because this is so new and cutting edge, and we're finding so many miraculous results when people start to either take bile salts or build up their bile naturally, I really want to emphasize many of these points because I think they're so very important. There's another critical element to the whole bile picture, and that is that if you don't have enough fiber, then you can't escort all those toxins that are now in the bile out of the body, and they can remain way too long in your gut, and then they become reabsorbed. So that's a real problem because when toxic overload occurs, then there are all these poisonous wastes that end up pretty stagnant in the lymph system, and they get stuck in the bloodstream. They start to clog up the joints and other tissues. It's been said by many researchers that a 75% bile deficiency can occur by the time you start to experience allergies or arthritis and inflammation in your joints and muscles. And by the time you've got chronic illness or, God forbid, cancer, then you've got at least a whopping 90% of bile deficiency, and that's already occurred. So if your gallbladder hasn't been doing its job in terms of secreting quality bile, and sometimes that's also due to a lack of the right kinds of fats or too much hydrogenated fat, or if your gallbladder is absolutely gone, then your ability to adequately regulate proper bile flow is non-existent. You know, without your gallbladder, what you have to understand is that there's still this steady release of bile from the liver, but it's not matched appropriately with the amount of oil or fat that you are currently consuming. So this, in essence, starts to have a domino and rather detrimental effect on your entire system, because you are not absorbing those fat-soluble vitamins that I mentioned earlier, and that is the deficiency of the A, the E, the D, the K, and the essential fatty acids. So regardless of where the bile is, whether it's still in that liver or it's able to be stored in your gallbladder because you still have it, or in the bile ducts, it seems that the principles of manufacturing, thinning, and moving bile are the very same. Bile breaks down dietary fats and all fat-soluble vitamins, and this in and of itself is simply no insignificant task. And if you take a look at any decent nutritional textbook these days and you research all the symptoms and the problems that are linked with fat-soluble vitamin deficiencies, you're going to find everything from dry skin to indigestion, to cataracts, and even cancer. So who knew? And who knew that bile also acts as a wonderful lubricant for your stool to help prevent constipation? So it's not just a lack of magnesium, not just a lack of fiber, but it could be a lack of bile that's got you not going. I think it's fascinating because when I did some research with my Eat Fat, Lose Weight, I read some unusual research not only from the French, but also the Hungarians, who found that bile is not just connected to our obesity epidemic, but also hypothyroidism. And this is something that I think needs to be examined in a lot more detail. The researchers discovered that fat metabolism is actually sped up by the activation of thyroid hormones in the fat cells. So I truly believe that an imbalance or inadequate bile is one of the key reasons that hypothyroidism is so rampant today. It appears that a lack of the proper kind of bile or inadequate bile flow is related to a number of the incurable diseases that we are now suffering from. Now, millions of us may be experiencing unrecognized signs of poor bile digestion, and those occur, or those incur, like bloating, nauseousness, maybe sluggishness, hemorrhoids, and even that dry skin and hair. And well over 20 million of us have known gallbladder challenges, while millions still go more undiagnosed. And you've got to ask yourself why. And I think that we just haven't had enough information to connect the dots between all the seemingly disconnected but very urgent signals that our body is sending out loud and clear. And I think it's a real crying shame that gallbladder removal has become, as I mentioned before, the most common type of surgery in this country. And it's usually because of the presence of gallstones or because of some sort of gangrene situation. So gallstones commonly occur because of congested bile, which is due to a buildup, which results in the precipitation of stones. And ideally, that treatment should be consisting of bile that becomes thinned out, decongested, and fluid. So you want to just thin and decongest what's already been building up into these little stones or little pebbles, so to speak. And for those that no longer have a gallbladder, it is absolutely critical. This is not negotiable, but it's critically important to mimic your body's natural output of bile by taking an ox bile supplement, which is also known as bile salts. So while you may not be able to exactly duplicate your body's wisdom of knowing just when and how to release the exact right amount of bile, supplementation with bile salts can go a long way in maximizing the process and assuring that all those wonderful fat-soluble vitamins are being absorbed. The problem with too much bile supplementation is that it will create loose stools, while too little can make for very light or clay-colored stools. So when you're in the bathroom, just take a look at what you're eliminating. If your BMs are too light or clay-colored, then you got a problem there with bile. There's also a big allergy connection, by the way, to all these problems that people are having with their gallbladder that I think are the primary reason that people get their gallbladder removed, because of the precipitation of stones, maybe due to an inflammatory response, and because there is an issue with some of these foods and food sensitivities that are triggering maybe fluid in the bile ducts. So I think if you still have your gallbladder, but are experiencing frequent gallbladder attacks, or if you've had your gallbladder taken out but are still experiencing some sort of pain, then you've got to become a little bit more familiar with a fellow who wrote about all kinds of dietary issues with regard to the gallbladder. His name was Dr. James Brenneman, who was an allergist that wrote prolifically about this in the 60s and 70s. And he was the only one in my research that I found truly identified food allergies, would you believe it, as a primary underlying cause of gallbladder pain. And I discovered his landmark work and then went to some of the original sources. I discovered his work thanks to my own integrative physician, Dr. Jonathan Wright, who wrote about Dr. Brenneman's work in one of his newsletters several years ago. Now, Dr. Jonathan Wright is himself very brilliant and very insightful, and he wrote about this issue of gallbladder issues as well as gallbladder pain and the connection between food allergies way back in 2004. And I was caught with his very enticing headline. I mean, it just caught my eye, which is why I kept it so many years. It was the 99.9% effective technique for eliminating gallbladder attacks forever. I mean, that's a pretty interesting promise that very enticing headline promised. I think you could call it clickbait in this day and time, but quite frankly, his clickbait delivered. Well, Jonathan's newsletter article brought to light Dr. Brenneman's discovery, and it was pretty surprising even back then, that gallbladder pain was significantly related to food allergies. In his studies from the 60s and 70s of individuals both with and without a gallbladder, he found that there was one food that was the major offender of all, and it wasn't wheat back then, but was eggs. 92.8% of these individuals who had significant gallbladder pain, whether or not they had their gallbladder in or out, were found to be allergic to eggs. Second to eggs was pork, but that was just 63.8% of individuals, and then onions at 52.2%. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Eggs, pork, and onions. Other foods which he felt accounted for problems with the gallbladder were chicken and turkey, then followed by milk. That wasn't even a biggie back then. Interesting, isn't it? As well as coffee and oranges. So when Dr. Brenneman found that his study participants eliminated particular food allergies, again, it was the eggs, the pork, and the onions were the big three, these individuals not only obtained a little relief, they obtained 100% relief. I mean, that's kind of like a wow. So needless to say, if your gallbladder is acting up, then it behooves you to give an elimination diet an absolute try. Or at least you should avoid the top 3 primary offenders, which once again are eggs, are pork, are onions. And you know what you've got to lose. Not your gallbladder, I hope. The bottom line is you simply must ensure that you will be utilizing all of the smart fats you will be adding back into your diet with or without your gallbladder for the most complete digestion, assimilation, and utilization, because it takes the smart fats to actually trigger the secretion of bile in the first place. So a diet that is no fat or low fat without the proper amounts of fats will also be problematic for the gallbladder. So you need to utilize all the right fats, like your coconut oil, like your flaxseed oil, your nuts, your seeds, your avocado, macadamia nut oil, even some butter, even some seeds that I think I mentioned to you before, your flaxseed, your fish oil, your macadamia nut oils, your avocado oils. All of those are so very important in terms of having the gallbladder secrete the proper amount of bile and helping you to break down these fats into the essential fatty acid components, especially from the omega-3 families, which is your flax, which is your fish, which is your walnuts, and your good omega-6s, which is your evening primrose oil, your black currant seed oil, your borage, and then your CLA, which is a critical fatty acid, your omega-7s, which you're going to be getting in anchovy oil, in macadamia oil, macadamia nuts, and all the healthy monounsaturated fats that you're going to be getting in avocados, avocado oil, olive oil, and then you've got your healthy saturated fats that would be from red palm oil as well as coconut oil. All of those are actually very good for you, provided you're breaking them down properly with certain nutrients that can actually help to emulsify and digest. And that is where a very specialized product and foods come into play. So let me talk about the foods that are important in helping to make for better bile, this secret cure to effective weight loss and detox. The most important foods are the foods that are bitter. So when it comes to your bile, just remember that bitter is better. Whatever has a bitter taste, whether they're bitter herbs or bitter foods, are very good for secreting the kind of bile that will be doing the proper job in terms of the complete digestion, assimilation, and utilization of fats. The other components of bile that are helpful in terms of thinning it out are 2 foods that have kind of fallen out of favor. One of them is a non-GMO soy lecithin, which for many people is quite healthy. It was a superfood in the 70s and 80s and seems to have fallen out of favor for some very strange reason. But if it's non-GMO, it is a wonderful thinner of the bile. And so I would suggest you put a tablespoon or 2 of non-GMO soy lecithin or sunflower lecithin, but most of the research has been done on soy lecithin, into your smoothie every day. So we like that. The other types of foods that are very healthy would include some hot lemon and water, very emulsifying for your bile, that's a bile thinner, as well as dandelion root tea, which you can get in tea bags these days. That's very helpful in terms of thinning out the bile. Betaine from beets is also a very healthy food in that regard. So there are a lot of little foods, or there are lots of foods that are not so little, but that have big dividends in terms of health that you can integrate very easily and very simply into your daily diet. If you don't have a gallbladder, it's a little bit more difficult, and that's where you need to take either a supplement, or you need to get a supplement that contains maybe some ox bile or bile salts. Ox bile extract is also known as bile salts, and should probably also have some other nutrients that are very specific for fat digestion and can help to regenerate the part of your liver that actually makes bile. So that was the motivation that I had for creating a supplement which is known as Bile Builder that you can find online at unityhealth.com. Bile Builder contains all of the nutrients that I found in my research were so helpful for a fatty liver, for the ability to chelate heavy metals from the system, thereby reducing the liver's toxic load. And what I put in there was some choline, first and foremost. There is 500 milligrams of choline in 2 capsules, which is the amount that is suggested by many of our holistic, alternative, and integrative physicians in terms of getting rid of a fatty liver. That's 500 milligrams of choline at each meal. And so if you take 2 capsules of the Bile Builder, you'll be getting 500 milligrams of choline at each meal. A little bit of lipase to help out the ox bile extract. Lipase, as you know, and this is a pancreatic lipase. It's a pancreas-based enzyme. Pancreatic lipase, yes, it's from the pancreas. It helps break down fats to help emulsify them. And then we have a little bit of taurine, which is a very specific nutrient that helps. It's an amino acid, actually, which helps the bile to excrete chemicals detoxified by the liver, and it has the ability to also promote increased bile acid production, as well as reduce cholesterol levels in the liver and the bloodstream. I have seen this as a very key, important amino acid because it seems to be the most deficient when we do any of our amino acid testing. And it's commonly lacking in individuals with multiple environmental sensitivities or allergies, and it is absolutely required by the liver on a day-to-day basis for the removal of toxic chemicals, of drugs, as well as metabolites from the body. I love it because I use it to detoxify heavy metals. So in this Bile Builder, we've got ample amounts of taurine. There's 250 milligrams in 2 capsules. We've got some ox bile extract, which does provide those essential bile salts for those of us with low bile production or without gallbladders. And bile deficiency is very common for those over the age of 60, or if you're fat, if you're female, and you're 40 for some crazy reason. And I think it has to do with excessive amounts of estrogen that actually will congeal the bile. Last but not least, in this particular formula, I made sure that we had something called stone root or collinsonia. And I felt that this was important to add to the formula because it has the ability to remove gallstones and can prevent constipation, which can result in some individuals. And this particular herb has been used traditionally for centuries for this purpose. And it's also good to some degree to get rid of kidney stones. So all of these nutrients, the choline, the lipase, the taurine, the ox bile, the beetroot, which I didn't talk to you about, which contains the betaine, which thins the bile and then helps to prevent the formation of gallstones. All of this can be found in this particular supplement called Bile Builder. You're welcome to check any other supplement or get these individually, but I think this is probably your best bet because it's worked wonders with so many individuals. And I have seen individuals that could not lose weight. I have seen women that have all kinds of estrogen dominant issues or hypothyroidism. They've done wonderfully well by just supplying the body with the raw materials that it needs in terms of bile production. I mean, who would have known it? Who would have thunk it? So I think if you're one of the millions of Americans who are missing a gallbladder, or if you're having fat digestion or any kind of detox issues, bile could be your missing link and the secret cure. The Bile Builder that I've told you about will deliver 6 stellar miracle workers for your body, helping your system to produce and thin bile. And it will get it moving so that it can do its job and not gunk up the bile ducts or form stones. So many of you, like me, could have overlooked bile for years or even a lifetime. So here's your chance to discover this missing link and set yourself on a lifetime course of health. Thank you so very much. May you be healthy and live to 120.